Hey everyone, welcome to another advanced sports analytics application tutorial. In this video, we're going to be covering our NBA volume and efficiency application. This application is more or less mimicking the nature of our NFL volume efficiency app, which I think people have found useful in understanding uh, overall efficiency and usage rates of NFL players, as well as kind of the range of outcomes. We have in the case of NFL, obviously it's important to understand kind of the mean, for example, target share that a wide receiver might garner in a single game. But I think it's also valuable to look at that stuff in time series and to understand on any single game kind of what the range of possible outcomes uh, for some of these usage metrics might be. So we wanted to create an NBA version of that so that people could develop understandings for players' baseline efficiency metrics as well as the baseline volume metrics that players access, I guess, over the course of a season and an individual games, and also information that maybe helps contextualize the range of possible outcomes for individual players on any given day. We have players who average, let's just say 30 minutes per game, and maybe we project to play 30 minutes per game, but understanding which 30-minute per game players have access to a 40 plus minute ceiling or a sub 20 floor versus other players that are kind of comfortably at 30 but have little wiggle room as far as how many minutes they receive, I think is valuable and could be incorporated into DFS play either for cash games, trying to avoid players with high variance in some of these volume and opportunity metrics, and maybe focusing on more stable players. As we're in tournaments, maybe there is some value to identifying players with access to super high volume metrics. I think could be useful. So like the NFL version, you can search players by simply clicking their name in the dropdown, um, or you can also type player names in by name. So Anthony Davis or LeBron James, and clicking their name as it appears. Start with a time series just so you can kind of see what the raw data that we're considering looks like. You can bracket data points by date. So if we wanted to focus on the 2020 season, we could select date range that only includes that 2020 season, and we can see plotted through time the different y variables that we select. So in this case, minutes. You can look at other stuff like field goal attempts per game or true shooting percentage, which is more of like an efficiency metric. Uh, I don't know, offensive rating, stuff like that. These are all variables that we model on and incorporate into our projections. I think in particular, some of these volume metrics are particularly useful for just projecting player role on a game by game basis. I think also looking at stuff, it's hard to understand how to incorporate, like, okay, what is a player's expected true shooting percentage? How do we incorporate that into a projection? But some simple stuff like fantasy points per minute, I think could be valuable, especially if we have players who maybe are in like some sort of sliding role where there's a player who has displayed some baseline fantasy point per minute efficiency in a backup role, maybe 18 minutes per game type role, all of a sudden thrust into a starting role where they're projectable for 30, 33 minutes, something like that. Understanding players' underlying fantasy points per minute can help us extrapolate. There are obviously more nuanced, I guess, considerations for how that efficiency might change as the rotation that they're playing in changes, but I still think a decent baseline to consider as we are definitely considering players within moving roles. We can view this data in one of two ways: either the observed value, uh, how many, if we go back to minutes, how many minutes a player has played per game, and we'll just focus on Los Angeles Lakers, just focus on a single team. So how many minutes are observed in an individual game? This can be noisy over time, and sometimes it's just easier to look at a rolling average. So the 30-day rolling average minutes per game of these different Lakers players. Um, as we can see, really all three of these guys, looks like LeBron in particular, his kind of minutes per game is trending up a bit as of late. I think that is partially due to, let's see, at least here, a fairly low um, minute game, perhaps on account of this 127 to 91 score. Los Angeles winning by almost 40 points, perhaps could be reason for suppressed minute level. So looking at it in time series, I think is useful for understanding, I think, range of possible outcomes, right? Like LeBron has this, well, as we can see, rolling average, at least most recently up over 32 minutes per game, which is great. But understanding that his range of minutes uh, really lies somewhere between the kind of high 20s to mid 30s with little access to kind of a high 30 or even 40 plus minute, I guess, ceiling, at least so far this year, I think is valuable in understanding. There are players around the league who have shown access to kind of 40 plus minute ceilings, and maybe they do so at lower kind of per minute efficiency. But it is, I guess, noteworthy in understanding that, at least right now, LeBron James hasn't been used, or the Lakers haven't been willing to use him in like a massive, 38 plus type minute role. So we can look at things in time series. We can also look at volume and efficiency metrics via this table tab, and pretty straightforward. Just type in the columns that we want to view player averages over this date range, and we can populate our table with the columns that we're interested in, sort on these different columns, understand which Lakers players so far this year are playing the most minutes, taking the most field goal attempts, have highest rebound rates, I don't know, have the best kind of per minute efficiency. So LeBron James, even though he's playing fewer minutes than Davis, has a not insignificantly better efficiency, at least so far. We'll see kind of how that stabilizes through time. So yeah, I think this is a particularly useful way to aggregate and just kind of view long form averages of players. We can also bracket it by time period. So maybe if we suspect that LeBron has entered, even Schroeder, like it looks like Schroeder is in a distinctly different role, and perhaps that's due to injury. I can see that in this game, Alex Caruso is injured. No noteworthy positional injuries there. I know Kentavious Caldwell Pope has been injured the past few games. He kind of plays a similar position to Schroeder. So like maybe we can see so far this year Schroeder's averaging 31 minutes per game. But if we wanted to bracket on, this most recent stretch that he's been on where he does seem to be showing kind of elevated minutes, we could go to, December 28th rather, and see that, okay, over the last, what is it, 5 games or so, Shooter is actually at kind of this 34 minute per game total, 14 shots. So I think, that type of stuff is interesting and a useful way to use date bracketing to kind of get current roles of players. Another way we can parse out like roles of players conditional on injuries. So I mentioned here how KCP has been injured these last 2 games. We can actually type in Caldwell Pope's name into this inactives input, and we will only filter in games in which KCP has been inactive. So while Schroeder so far this year has had this, uh, in games where KCP has been inactive, he's had this, almost 34 minute, 14 shot uh, kind of role over the course of the entire season. His minutes and shot attempts have been down just a touch. It's interesting that his efficiency over the course of the year has been kind of up compared to this, 0.95 minutes per game, uh, compared to KCP inactive games, in which Schroeder's probably been spending a little more time playing with the starting rotation. As actually his per minute efficiency has been down. Yeah, so I think interesting and good way to use inactive player filtering to maybe understand how injuries of certain players might impact the role or efficiency of other players. So yeah, that's a volume efficiency NBA application. Good way for viewing player volume, player efficiency, either per minute or through some sort of rate, per possession rate, um, either as a aggregate in the tabular form or in time series with kind of more of a range of possible outcomes feel to it. Hope you guys find this tool useful in if you're doing any sort of your own projecting or kind of range of outcome consideration. I think these are potentially good use cases for this application.